have going on in life. And I just kept praying to the Lord, like, Lord, what is it that you have for us this week? You know, every week as I'm praying, I'm like, Lord, I don't want to just put something up that, I created, but what is it that you want to say to us? I think it's very important that we know that whenever we're getting ready to take another step and getting ready to do something new, we've got to stop and ask the Lord what he really has for us. How many of us have at some point made some decisions before we prayed and how some of those decisions turned out? I got plenty of ex-boyfriends, right? I mean, it happens. And so, y'all know we're very transparent here, for y'all sure. So, there are things that we just make such rash decisions of. And sometimes we feel like we're desperate, and it's dangerous. A desperate people are dangerous people. Because desperate people will do whatever they have to do to make it to the next level. Now that can be a good thing or that can be a bad thing. Depending on what you're desperate for, if you're desperate for something that's fleshly, sometimes you'll do fleshly things to get that. And so as I was studying and praying this week, the Lord led me to the book of Jonah. And everybody knows I love the Old Testament. I love it. I love the history of the Old Testament. I love hearing all of these stories of these great and wise men and women of God, and the ones who weren't always good. I like to hear about those things. And so as I was studying and researching Jonah, I started really getting inundated by what some of the other theologians' opinions about Jonah were. And there are so many that are out there. But the story that is in Jonah is so rich, and I believe that it is a message for us today. So today we're going to be talking about answering the call. Before we get started, I want you to get in your mind, what is the call of God on my life? What has he asked you to do? What has been confirmed over your life? What are some things, there are some of us in here that it was spoken to us when we were 5 years old. It was spoken over our lives when we were newborn. It was something that was told to our parents. There are some things that we have been called to do that some of us just aren't walking in it just yet. Or some of us aren't walking in it completely just yet. So we're going to be talking about answering the call, but I want you to hold on to what your individual call is. Amen? Amen. Now, y'all make sure y'all talk back to me today because I'm sniffling and sneezing, all right? All right, go ahead to the first slide. So we're in Jonah 1. It says, the Lord gave this message to Jonah, son of Amittai. He says, get up, go to the great city of Nineveh, announce my judgment against it, because I have seen how wicked its people are. But Jonah got up, and he went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He went down to the port of Joppa, where he found a ship leaving from Tarshish. He bought a ticket, went on board, hoping to escape from the Lord by sailing to Tarshish. Okay, go ahead. This brings me to my first point, and I know that this is something that we all know. Look at your neighbor and say, you cannot outrun the call of God.
Outrun the call of God.
Look at somebody else behind you and say, bruh. You cannot outrun the call of God. I know, let me tell you, this is how I imagine God when he speaks to me. He be like, son Nick, you cannot outrun me. I'm everywhere, right? But how often does God show us something or confirm something and we do the total opposite? How often does he speak it to us and he'll have somebody who's not even saved come and reaffirm it? And you be like, hold up, I'm in a club. Why are you talking? Right? Oh, that's just my testimony? Don't judge me, right? So, he'll say, wait a minute. You can't outrun what God has called you to do. I don't care what your mama said. I don't care what your daddy said. I don't care if you were in the foster system and you feel like you were never enough and you were giving up. It doesn't matter. There's a call of God on your life and you can't outrun it. Amen? Amen. Go ahead. Now, Jonah, can you go back to that first slide? No, go back one more time. So let's just be clear. The Lord specifically speaks to him and he takes off running. Now, first of all, God clearly knows where you live, right? He came to talk to you, and you decide that you're going to get up and you're going to run to this other place. But it's very, remember, I love history. So it says he found a ship leaving for Tarshish. So Tarshish was actually a city that worshipped fish. They worshipped fish. They worshipped, there was 500 miles, Nineveh, worshipped fish. And so it was 500 miles from the nearest lake, though, right? So this is how crazy these people are, right? So they're 500 miles away from the closest area where fish could ever naturally live. But here, this is where they worship fish and amphibians and things of that nature, right? But he decides that he doesn't want to go and tell Nineveh that God is getting ready to judge them, because he would prefer that they all die. Because these people are Assyrians, and Assyrians have enslaved Israelites. They've enslaved Jonah. They've enslaved his people. And because they've enslaved his people, they're like, no. He's like, I'm not going to tell them. What if God told you to go and prophesy to somebody you know hates you? What if God told you to go and give a message from him to somebody who you know slandered your name? I want to say I do it, because I'm standing up here. But in real life, it might cause me to stumble. I might say, God, God, I ain't going to tell you I don't like them, because I want you to have grace and mercy on me. But in the back of my mind, what if God sends you to give a word to somebody that you don't even like? Think about that for a minute. Go ahead and go up those 2 slides. Thank you. So in verse 4, he says, but the Lord hurled a powerful wind over the sea, causing a violent storm that threatened to break the ship apart. Fearing for their lives, the desperate sailors shouted to their gods for help, and they threw the cargo overboard to lighten the ship. But at this time, Jonah was sound asleep in the hold. So the Lord is causing, this is not a regular storm. And the reason why we know it's not a regular storm is because it says, fearing for the lives, the desperate sailors shouted to their gods for help. If you're a sailor, you've seen your share of storms, right? Not much is gonna, my father was in the Navy, and so there's not many storms that bother him, right? He's like, nah, we can go on a cruise. We're like, it's hurricane season. He's like, nah, it'll be all right. Right? That's his thing. I don't know. But he could just be frugal, pray for him. Right? So, it says they were fearing for their life. This was a supernatural storm that happens. So it says the captain, it says all through this supernatural time, Jonah is downstairs asleep. Now, I'll tell you, my oldest daughter can sleep through a hurricane, right? She just can. She likes her sleep. Sleep is her ministry. Amen? So, but this guy, there's a violent storm going on, and it's beating, they're throwing cargo overboard, but it says the captain goes down to Jonah. He says, how can you sleep at a time like this? Get up, pray to your God. Now, mind you, they were shouting to all the gods and it didn't work, right? He says, you get up and pray to your God, because maybe he will pay attention to us and spare our lives. And then the crew, they cast lots to see which of them had offended the gods and caused the terrible storm. And when they did this, the lots identified Jonah as the culprit. Now, I know we've heard about casting lots before. We hear about that quite a lot in the Old Testament. And I know of one particular instance in the New Testament where they talk about casting lots. Casting lots was a pagan ritual that people would use to try to get answers. It was kind of like gambling. It was like they would throw these things out, and whoever they felt like it was pointing to, then you were the one who God was talking to, right? And I said that, I brought up that point because sometimes we'll look at things like astrology, and we'll look at things like, what's your sign, and different things like this, and you will be so amazed that this stuff is correct. It can be correct, but that doesn't mean that it's of God. If it's not giving honor to God, then it is not of God. Does that make sense? That's why we have to be mindful. I grew up in a super Pentecostal household, so when people be like, what's your sign? I'll be like, Jesus, Christ, right? Just real super holiness, right? But because my parents instilled in us that everything that should be about you should give honor to God. Yeah, it could mean that this could be, some information could be correct, but pretty much they got a 50-50 chance, right? So just be mindful of that. So they use this. This is where you see that. You see that they cast these lots and they realize that it's Jonah. And verse 8, he says, why is this awful storm come down on us? They demanded. Who are you? What is your line of work? What country are you from? What is your nationality? They start drilling him, interrogating him. They're trying to figure out what is going on. And Jonah answers them. He says, I'm Hebrew. I worship the Lord, Yahweh, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land. Right? Now Jonah, he answering like, I know who I serve. But he knows he's in trouble. Anybody ever knew they was in trouble but they still bold? See how bold he is? He bold. He's strong and raw. He says, I'm a Hebrew. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land. Okay, bro, then talk to him, because the sea is going crazy, right? So the sailors, they're terrified. And when they heard this, he said he had already told them that he was running away from the Lord. They said, why did you do it? They groaned. Like, what is wrong with this man? Look at your neighbor and say, what's happening? Go ahead to that next slide. And since the storm was getting worse all the time, they asked him, what should we do to you to stop this storm? So they're saying, if your God is the only God that's answering at this point, you're the only one that can stop this. If your God is the only one that's answering in this season, you are the only one that can stop what's going on. At your job, in your class, in your family, the calling of God on your life is the only thing that's going to stop this storm from going on. And so we go on and we see here, Jonah says, throw me into the sea and it will become calm again. I know that this terrible storm is all my fault. This is a trick of the enemy. Because what the enemy wants you to do is the enemy wants you to quit. The enemy wants you to throw in the towel. The enemy wants you to say, you know what, just throw me overboard. He was essentially saying, help me commit suicide. Because if I see that this storm is doing, I'm going to drown. He says, go ahead, throw me into the sea. It'll be calm again because I know it's my fault. There are some things that are our fault. There are some trials that we put ourselves in. But we serve a God of grace and mercy. That even when it's our fault, he already sent his son to pay for it. So you don't have to be concerned about what you put yourself in. All you have to do is say, God, I repent. I repent. And I'm moving forward. Amen? Look at your neighbor and say, we got to move forward.
We got to move forward.
So he tells them to throw him into the sea. But verse 13 says, instead, the sailors, they rowed even harder to try to get the ship to land. But the stormy sea was too violent for them, and they couldn't make it. These Gentiles, these are people who do not believe in the Lord. But they said, nah, we're not going to throw you over. There's some people right now who don't believe nothing like you believe that act almost better than you do. Amen. If we're really honest, I got some people, there's people at my job, I be like, they are so nice all the time. But if you catch me at 6 a.m., I'm not always as nice. Amen? But they do this. They say, no, we ain't going to throw you over. But then verse 14, they say, okay, now we done tried. But it says they cried out to the Lord, Jonah's God. Oh, Lord, they pleaded, don't make us die for this man's sin. And don't hold us responsible for his death. Lord, you have sent this storm upon him for your own good reasons. And then the sailors, they picked Jonah up and they threw him into the raging sea. And the storm stopped at once. The sailors were awestruck by the Lord's great power, and they offered him a sacrifice and vowed to serve him. So before we even go to the next slide, understand, even in your disobedience, God will still get the glory. Even when we mess up, God will still get the glory. Sometimes we feel like I'm messed up around this group of people. I remember I got saved on the college campus. So My freshman year, my first semester looked an entirely different type than my second semester, okay? First semester was just turned up, just a mess, just in sin, just living everything according to my fleshly desires. And then I went home for Christmas break, I got saved, and I came back and I looked different and I acted different. And it was like, it ain't no way, Sonny. No. Ain't no way. Because you know what? Christmas break is like 3 weeks. Ain't no way that happened in 3 weeks. Nah, girl, come on. Girl, we going to come on, quit playing with us. Right? I got you, girl, I got you. And it was a difference. But I was nervous because I was like, they're not really going to really receive from me. But there's so much power in people who saw you where you used to be, and then they get to see you now. They're a testament to how you were before you knew God. That's powerful. Don't ever be ashamed of who you used to be. Just don't stay there. Amen? Amen. Go ahead. So it brings me to my next point. Even unbelievers respect what God has called you to. I keep thinking, put some respect on it. Even unbelievers. How many of us know some people who don't believe but still have respect for our beliefs? That's really that's how the world should be, right? And there are people who I work with, even in when I worked in Harlem. I mean, I love New York City because of the diversity that is there in people and beliefs and just anything. I always say New York City is a great place to live. They'll let you be whatever you want to be. I got some New Yorkers in here. I always say, if you wanted to be a blue marshmallow man, somebody would put on blue paint, they get picket signs and march, so you have the right to be a blue marshmallow. It's just the type of place they are. Amen? All right, somebody read that out loud for me. I'm coughing right there. Anybody?
Now the Lord had arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from inside the fish.
So, we know that, we used to call it a whale, right? Jonah and the whale, Jonah and the whale. Who knew that song? We went to Vacation Bible School. So we know that, we used to say it was a whale. But when people started really researching, it just says that it was a large fish, okay? It doesn't say a whale, but it was a big fish. So that's all we know. But what does that first part say? What does that first part say again, Brandon? That what?
Now the Lord had arranged.
Now, who arranged it? Was it the devil? Don't we give the devil a lot of power a lot of times? We think that everything that happens to us is the devil. First of all, I had to really check myself on this, and I think we talked about it before, where the devil can't be everywhere at once. So how is he getting around doing all this stuff? What kind of car he driving? Right? He's moving, right? Whereas, understand that there are some things that we have put on ourselves, but this part says that the Lord had to arrange for a great fish to swallow Jonah. Some of us will get to the point where we feel like we are literally wallowing and we are drowning in a situation. We'll feel like we are literally, we're trying to crawl out. We're in quicksand. And the Bible says that Jonah was inside this fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And then Jonah prayed to the Lord, his God, from inside the fish. Now, I don't know about y'all, but when I be driving, if I see the state trooper, I'm immediately in tongues. I don't understand how he went 3 days and 3 nights and then started praying, right? You ever notice that when you really into something, that prayer life, you could not have not prayed for 2 weeks. But let that police pull behind you. All of a sudden, you're like, Father God, in the name of Jesus, I submit my will to you. Make me invisible. Don't act like y'all ain't prayed that prayer. Because my tag is not renewed. But Jonah, it takes him 3 days, right? It takes him 3 days and 3 nights. And then he says, he prayed to the Lord his God from inside the fish. So right in the middle of the situation, he finally gets it. And he prays inside the fish. Go ahead to The next one. Here's my third point. There are some trials that the Lord had to prepare to subdue you so you wouldn't kill yourself. So you wouldn't kill your dream. So you wouldn't kill your vision. So you wouldn't kill your idea. So you wouldn't kill your entrepreneurial spirit. There are some things, there are some issues, there are some things. One time that car didn't start because God didn't want you to get into a car accident. One time you lost your keys to your house because somebody was scoping and seeing if they was going to rob you. What does God save you from? Go ahead to the next slide. Brandon, go ahead.
He said, I cried out to the Lord in my great trouble, and he answered me. I called to you from the land of the dead, and Lord, you heard me. You threw me into the ocean depths, and I sank down to the heart of the sea. The mighty waters engulfed me. I was buried beneath your wild and stormy waves. Then I said, O Lord, you have driven me from your presence, yet I will look once more toward your holy temple. I heard the waves, and the waters closed over me. Seaweed wrapped itself around my head.
So he goes in and he says, I cried out to the Lord. This is actually the beginning of the prayer. The whole second chapter is all the prayer that Jonah starts to pray to the Lord. And he says, I cried out to him in the midst of my great trouble, from the land of the dead, and you heard me. I mean, he's talking about, I've been in my worst situation, and God, you had to hear me. I know sometimes we forget to pray to the Lord when everything is going well, but a lot of us become intercessors when things are going bad. We know how to get his attention. He starts going through and listing. I was all the way in the ocean depths. I was deep down, and I said, Lord, help me, help me. I sank into the waves. The waters closed over me, and seaweed has wrapped around my head. He literally is talking about, I am drowning in this situation. What is it right now that you can say, Lord, I feel like I'm drowning. I feel like I can't take that next step up. I feel like every time I go up, I take 2 steps back. What is it? What is it in your life right now? God is trying to remind us today that even if you're in that, there's still a call that is on your life. Look at your neighbor and say, you still got a call. Go ahead to that next slide. Brandon, can you help me?
Yes, I sank down to the very roots of the mountains. I was imprisoned in the earth, whose gates locked shut forever. But you, O Lord my God, snatched me from the jaws of death. As my life was slipping away, I remembered the Lord, and my earnest prayer went out to you in your holy temple. Those who worship false gods turn their backs on all God's mercies. But I will offer sacrifices to you with songs of praise, and I will fulfill all my vows, for my salvation comes from the Lord alone. Then the Lord ordered the fish to spit Jonah out onto the beach.
So when did the Lord, before we get to verse 10, when does the Lord order the fish to spit Jonah out? After what? What is he in the middle of doing? He's repenting. He's praying. He's having a full-blown conversation with the Lord. Even though he just got finished being on the run, not Jay-Z and Beyonce's tour, right? He just got finished running, and he says, you know what? I gotta bring myself in. Even though I'm in the worst situation possible and I put myself in this situation, I gotta bring myself into subjection. And then verse 10, he says, then the Lord ordered the fish to spit Jonah out onto the beach. Go ahead. Point 4. When you can turn a bad situation into an opportunity for prayer, it can become the very thing that propels you forward into your destiny. God used what swallowed him up to propel him forward. Whatever it is that you're sinking in, God is using it to propel you, to spit you out further than you would have gotten just walking. Isn't God awesome? Isn't it awesome how he takes the stuff that we think is just terrible and he turns it around for our good? Amen? No, I think that you still right? Yes. Sorry. So then the Lord spoke to Jonah a second time. Now mind you, Jonah has done what? The Lord spoke to him, and what's the first thing he do? He booked it out of there, right? So he takes off running. He gets swallowed up by this fish. He gets thrown off this boat, swallowed up by this fish. And then he starts praying. He's there for 72 hours, crying, snotting, and praying. You know, that good prayer when you just get all of it just come out, everything, right? So he's doing all of that. And then he repents, and the Bible says that the Lord immediately has the fish to spit him out onto the land. And then the Lord spoke to Jonah a second time. This is what I love about God. God is sovereign. He does not have to give us multiple chances. He doesn't have to. And I love how God chooses to give us grace and mercy. And he chooses here to speak to Jonah a second time. And he says, get up, go to the great city of Nineveh, and deliver the message I have given you. And this time, Jonah obeyed the Lord's command and went to Nineveh, a city so large that it took 3 days to see it off. So the New Living Translation says it took 3 days to see it off. King James Version says it's a 3 days journey, right? And so he goes there. The city was so large that it just took so long to get from one end to the other. Go ahead to that next one. This is my 5th point, and I'm almost finished. Even if you first ran away, God is still calling your name. Even if at first you backslid, God is still calling your name. Even if at first you threw it all away, God is saying, hey, I'm still calling you. I'm still talking to you. I'm still motioning for you to come on back to me. That's how powerful repentance is. Amen? Go ahead to that next slide. So on the day Jonah entered the city, he shouts to the crowds, 40 days from now, Nineveh will be destroyed. Now this is what I didn't understand about Jonah initially, is Jonah did not like Nineveh. So I would think he would be okay coming to tell them, y'all about to be destroyed. Right? You know, people like to give bad news to people they don't like. I mean, it happens. So, this is why he didn't want to do it, though. Verse 5. Brandon, can you read that real loud for me?
The people of Nineveh believed God's message, and from the greatest to the least, they declared a fast and burlap to show their sorrow. So, burlap, when you put on burlap back in this time, and when you would, that's like putting on sackcloth and ashes, that meant you were embarrassed. Okay? So they're literally showing the world, and you know, during this time, these customs, you did not show that you were embarrassed. Okay? That was like a no-no. So the entire, it says from the greatest to the, that means from the oldest to the youngest, they all declared a fast. They put on this show of how embarrassed they are to show that they were sorry. Okay? Go ahead, verse 6. It says, when the king of Nineveh heard what Jonah was saying, he stepped down from his throne and took off his royal robes. He dressed himself in burlap and sat on the heap of ashes. So think about how powerful that is. The king, he hears what Jonah is saying. He comes off of his throne, unheard of, takes off his royal robes, even more rare, and he dressed himself in burlap and he sits in a heap of ashes. And then verse 7 he says, then the king and his nobles sent this decree throughout the city. No one, not even the animals from your herds and flocks, may eat or drink anything at all. Now, immediately, what you see here is they declare an immediate fast, right? We were talking about fast a couple weeks ago with the leadership, but most people who have ever done a fast have not done a complete fast, no water, no nothing, right? But these Gentiles who originally didn't even believe, suddenly they go right to the most basic of a fast. It doesn't matter how far left you have gone.
when you tell God that you're sorry, the zeal to do for him just explodes on the inside of you. How many of you remember when you first came into God, right? You know, when you first came into God, you remember that zeal that you had? Did everybody have that zeal, or was it just me? It was right? But you was like, oh, let's go to Bible study, right? I got a new Bible. And then as time goes on, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going on Sunday. I'm just going, right? It happens to a lot of us. That's why we have to continue to feed and sharpen one another, amen? But we see here that immediately they go right forward. Go ahead to that next slide. Gut break, can you read it?
It says, people and animals alike must wear garments of mourning, and everyone must pray earnestly to God. They must turn from their evil ways and stop all their violence. Who can tell? Perhaps even yet God will change his mind and hold back his fierce anger from destroying us. When God saw what they had done and how they had put a stop to their evil ways, he changed his mind and did not carry out the destruction he had threatened.
Do you see this? When God saw what they making sackcloth and ashes for the animals. People and animals alike must wear garments of mourning. They're literally killing animals to put animal skin on animals to show God, oh, we all mourning over here. Right? How many of us do that though? How many of us make sure like, hey, if I'm going to pray, everybody in my camp going to pray. If I'm going to get to another level of God, everybody in my house get to another level of God. That's exactly what they did. They took no prisoners. I don't know what y'all doing, but over here in Nineveh, everybody in mourning. Get up. Right? Oh, come on. We do it when it's something we want to do. Right? What if we had that same zeal for God and going higher in God? What if it was unacceptable to you for anybody in your crew to have a lackadaisical relationship with God? What if we all raise one another to a higher standard? For some of us in this room, that's your call. Your call is to raise the people that are around you to a higher level in God. But that means that you got to go higher. Look at your neighbor and say, we got to go higher. Verse 10, he says, when he saw what they had done and that they had put a stop to their evil ways, God changed his mind. Now, there's another instance in the Old Testament where God changes his mind is when he's dealing with Hezekiah. And the word of the Lord comes to Hezekiah, and the prophet tells him, God said, you're going to die. And turned and walked out. Like, what kind of word is that, right? He's like, yo, God said you're going to die, bro. All right. And he walks out. And Hezekiah goes, oh, I'm not taking that. And the Bible says that Hezekiah turned his back to the room, which is something that you never did. He turns his back to the room, he looks at the wall, and he starts praying. He said, Father, I want to live to give you more glory. And the Bible says, the prophet that walked out of the room turned around, he said, oh, God said he changed his mind. And the Bible says that Hezekiah starts rejoicing. And the Bible says that God added 10 years? He added a significant number of years to Hezekiah's life. Just because Hezekiah refused. He refused to do it. He's like, no. You're not going to come in my house and say, I'm about to die. Nah, God, I got to live for you. So it doesn't matter. And that really shows us that God does have the capacity to break the rules for you. He is sovereign. He don't have to change nothing. He already knew what we thinking he changed his mind. He already knew what his plan was. He already knew how it was going to play out. But even if a man of God or a woman of God comes and tells you God said this, the call of God that is on your life, you can switch that thing around just by saying, God, I'm sorry. God, I want to live for you. Go ahead to that next slide. And this is my last point. Your answered call has the potential to save a nation. It has the potential to save your family. It has the potential to save your marriage. It has the potential to save your finances, to save your schoolwork, to save your relationship. When you answer the call, even after you maybe try to run away, when you answer the call, it is going to shift what is taking place in your life. Because that's the kind of God that we serve. At this point, I want us all to stand up so we can pray. I believe that there are 3 people in this room that you know that you have been dealing with, struggling with answering the call. And you feel like you are drowning. You feel like you cannot even take another breath, like it's hard to breathe. Almost like it's asthmatic. And the Lord has been trying to get your attention. The Lord has been trying to reach you. He's been sending people to talk to you. But today God wants to remind you that there is still a call that is on your life. It doesn't matter what you did. It doesn't matter if it was last night, last week, 10 years ago. The Bible says that Jonah immediately, as soon as God told him, he took off running. He tried to run to a whole other nation. But God is saying that he's calling you back to him. If that's you, I want you to come and meet me here at the altar. I want to pray with you. Our ministers are going to come and pray with you. We want to lift you up because we know that there is a calling that's on your life. There's a calling that's on your life and you don't have to run from it anymore. Come on, move quickly.